Hey, welcome guys to the Stay Winning podcast. This is episode number 4, and it's going to be an overcoming barriers. With me today, I have my co-host Stephan Durso,
How we doing, guys?
and let's get right into it, man.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about what is a barrier to you. Like, how do you describe a barrier? How do you identify a barrier? What is the moment on your life where you thought as, hey man, this is another barrier. This is another breakthrough that I have to go through.
Oh, yeah. So first I'll define barriers, right? So what barriers sound like in your personal life? It's going to be something that is either a limitation that someone's putting on you or you're putting on yourself, right? So in life, we're all destined for greatness in our own ways, right? But sometimes we either create limiting beliefs in our minds that create a barrier, or someone tells us that we can't do a certain action, right? So both of those ways are kind of how I can define barriers, how I've seen barriers over my military career. And barriers, I think everyone in their military career from day one gets some type of barrier. Whether you're going to a recruiting office and the recruiter's telling you, hey, you can or can't do this job based on how you look, how you sound, how you perform, even though you might be able to accomplish greatness, right? And I think barriers inhibit us, right? Barriers aren't inhibit us. Now, what we have to look at, conversely, how we overcome those barriers. The number one thing, how to overcome barriers, you just got to put in the work. You have to identify what that barrier is and put in the work. So, like, for example, I remember when I was in ROTC and I wanted to be artillery in a combat arms, people scoffed initially, right? And, I get it, right? Maybe I had some quirks when I was a young guy, and of course I did, right? But what did I do? I overcame those quirks, and I overcame those through working out, through mindset training, right? And it took years to get to that point, but I'm comfortable now to say these things where back then it seemed a little foreign. But now the delta is the changes I'm putting in that work to kind of overcome those barriers based off what people stated and based off what I told myself. So that's really how I define it, what I look for it, and then how to overcome it. And I'm still working on it, but when you put in the work and you show up and you put yourself in the right environment with the right team, those are the 3 steps to overcome any barrier.
When I think about defining a barrier, right, I think a barrier is a stepping stone of the person that you want to become or a goal that you want to achieve, right? Whether it's physically, mentally, professionalism, you're always going to encounter some type of resistance
Right.
while you're going through the process, right? And the way we approach it is that sometimes we are fresh. We're fresh into a school, we're fresh into a new profession, so we break through the barrier right away. But sometimes we've been fighting for so long, especially let's talk mental health. Like, you put a veteran that's been through multiple deployments, multiple training exercises, been years training away from his family, from his professional life, constantly putting his body or his fitness through the test. Eventually you're gonna run out of energy, so that barrier is gonna become like a little bit more aggressive. It's gonna become something that you're gonna look at that barrier with different eyes.
Right.
So this is I was reading through a post the other day, and it was mentioning how I think it was by Tom Brady. Like, he was mentioning how motivation, and it's one of those motivational reels, I believe it was. And he was talking about imagining having a perfect life, right? Having going through the process where everything was going perfectly according to the plan. And he was mentioning there's no growth on that. There's like, you don't grow like that. You don't want a perfect life where you're not encountering any type of resistance, because you're gonna stay the same. But just like you mentioned before as well, barriers is something that you either put yourself or someone else put them in there for you.
That's right.
And when you're working through breaking through that barrier, sometimes you're gonna think that it's impossible to break through it. But if you step back and you look at the whole process, you're gonna see your growth when you look at your stats, when you look at your like at your daily actions, when you look at like 5 years behind where you were and now where you at right now, you're gonna see some progress, and that's like those are the signals that you need to be looking for in order to keep breaking through those barriers.
Yeah, and talking about progress, right? You can look at your physical transformation, and you may not see every muscle defined, every aspect of your muscle, but you know your mind has changed because there's no progress picture of the mind, and your body can be improving, but you know your mind can be stronger because that's internal, right? And it's also how others see you, perceive you, how you interact with other people. And that's really another indicator too, right? It's not always going to be on the outside, it's going to be on the inside, internally, right? So it's not always external, it'll be internal at sometimes. And that's also how you got to look at barriers too, is kind of where you started, where you are, and where you're going to. And it's, it almost brings a tear to my eye, kind of just thinking about what that progress looks like. I know what it looks like for you, what it looks like for me, what it looks like for other veterans too. Because people are not always where they are at the end, and that's kind of that beautiful story, if you would. And in that beautiful story, there's going to be tragedy, there's going to be heartbreak, right? But that's life. Life is not perfect. Life is what we make of it. And I think really when we kind of break it down, we are bound to fail. We're bound to fail more than once, more than twice, several times even in our lives. I know I have. But what do? You keep refining, you fail forward, you refine the process, and you get there, man. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And I think that's why this project is so important for both of us, because we want to see people succeed, right? You may not have all the answers, I may not have all the answers, but I think collectively in our communities we can all come together in the right place, the right time, which is now, and in the right organization, which is bringing everyone together. And that's, I think, the recipe for success, to break through any of these barriers, whether they're what we put on ourselves or others are putting on us.
I like how you mentioned adapting like the positive mindset while going through the barrier, right? So like the barrier is like a stepping stone to become a better you. So if we take that to the professional, like a professional example,
Yeah.
let's think about in the military. In the military, you're with the same leadership for about 2 or 3 years, and then you move to new leadership, right?
Right.
Every time that you switch leaderships, you might encounter a leader that's not as great as you thought he's going to be, right? And that's a professional barrier, right? That's keeping you behind in your career, or you feel like it's an obstacle between you and getting to the next point. And having a positive mindset can completely change your situation and how those 3 years go in your life. But it's a process that you have to go through, right? So there was one of our friends told me that there's always something positive that you can pick from a negative person, right? There's always
Oh
something
yeah.
that you can learn even from the worst leader that you encounter. And I
I'm
mentioned this
laughing
because
'cause it's so true. It's so fucking
yeah,
true. Like, I don't want to be that guy. That guy is an idiot in something that he did. I never want to do that. And that's still a lesson right there. Yeah.
100%. It is it is it's sometimes it becomes like it's a huge obstacle, right? And
Right.
and going to your professional life, and then you go back home and you try to transfer to your civilian life, it becomes a huge barrier. But if you adapt that positive mindset that you're picking all the only thing that you're picking is the positive stuff, you eventually will break through it. You only have to deal with it for like 2 or 3 years. So even though like that person is only with you for a certain period of time, you can still pick up like the positive stuff. That way you don't carry it to the next guy, or when you're in that position, you're not doing the same mistakes. So going back to those barriers are necessary in order for you to identify what to do, what not to do, and help you grow as a leader. Not only to help you grow as a leader, to help you grow as a person. Through those barriers, you become more resilient. Through those barriers, once you break through that barrier, you're gonna look at yourself and you're gonna feel different about yourself, right? You just encountered two
Right.
years, 6 months of a hard deployment, or 3 years of under bad leadership. Once you get out of that, you're gonna look back and you're gonna understand that it was necessary. It was necessary not only for you, it was necessary for your growth.
I couldn't agree more because, especially in the military, right? The military culture, you're not going to be successful up front. You're going to have to learn through experience, right? Through examples. And when I say examples, good examples, bad examples, and then experience. And that's going to get you basically through your career. That's going to define your career, and then your career defines yourself. So I think it's absolutely. And another thing that reminds me of in this conversation, it's the environment and even the unit. It's all about unit pride. So that's why, the top tier units, SF units, Ranger Regiment, right? All those units, they pride themselves, whereas there's other units out there that don't have that pride. And I think that's also a product of people that are going to have, I don't want to call it low self-esteem in a unit, but there's definitely units that have lower self-esteem. Absolutely. And I think that's also going to kind of
Yeah.
affect the mindset within the unit.
So I think one of the most recent barriers was when my last school in the military that I had to overcome.
Yeah.
And it was when I went to combat dive school, right? Uh, when I found out that I was going to combat dive school, I didn't prepare myself. I was overly confident. I grew up in Puerto Rico, so I was confident in, like, by this point I've been in the military career. I've been in my military career for over 12 years, and I already experienced a lot of mindset training, a lot of physical training. I always knew that I was good on the water because I grew up in the water. So
Right.
when I found out that I was going through dive school, I never prepared myself. I just went. And I think that was my biggest barrier, my biggest recent barrier
Right.
when I went during pre-dive. When I arrived at pre-dive, and the reason I talk about this story is because a lot of people ask me, say, hey man, I want to go into special operations, I want to go become a ranger, I want to go to combat dive school. What should I do to prepare? Maybe this will help you out. So when I arrived at pre-dive, I had zero preparation. I think I practiced the events maybe once or twice with one of my friends, but I had zero preparation. I knew I could run. I knew I was decent in the water, but the minute I showed up to pre-dive, it was a wake-up call for me. Everybody was well prepared. I was failing the events. I was not the greatest at the pool. I was struggling bad. And one of the biggest struggles was the 50-meter underwater swim. That was one of them. And I remember that I can barely make it 25 meters before breaking
Yeah.
the surface. I was in full panic mode. Like I can't even tell you how many times I attempted it and I failed. But one of the things during pre-dive, the cadre won't kick you out. You have to quit. If you want to quit, they'll let you out, but you never come back. But at that point in my career, I couldn't afford like just living pre-dive. Like quitting it was not an option. I had to finish it. So what the cadre used to do is there was a cadre that always used to swim with me, and when I was about to break through the surface, he'll come fucking speed up and push me back down. And when everybody else was done with their pool training, he always called me back to the pool. He always spent with me an extra 30 minutes, whether it
Sure.
was conducting bobs or doing extra training. And eventually, one of the days, I completely crushed the 50-meter swim, and that was the last time I failed. Once I broke through that barrier, I identified what I needed to fix. I identified the areas that I needed to improve, and it was all downhill from there. But the reason I mentioned this barrier is what how did I overcome that barrier? I overcome that barrier by repetition.
Yeah.
I overcome that barrier by consistency, and I overcome that barrier by not quitting, right? Things that I could have done better, I could have probably 100% prepared myself before attempting to the school. But at the end of the day, you're never gonna be ready enough to go that barrier. And when I transitioned to the actual dive school, I passed the events, and w- throughout dive school, this was a hard school. This was one of the toughest schools I've been, and I was telling myself, "Hey, this is a fucking hard school." But the minute the dive school fucking ended, you look back and you were telling yourself like, "Man, I should have probably done this prior, a couple of years prior to this day, you know?"
Right.
And the reason we don't do it, the reason I didn't do it is because is that fear, is that barrier of like that people used to put on that school or used to put on that mentality. Is like you hear there's stories about people going back to the pool or people going to dive school not making it, and you start creating those barriers in your head that that are not there. They're not real. Those are your stories from past failures that you're letting them get to you. So
I
that's
think that's
why that's
huge. Yeah. It's a huge perception. And then the other thing too, so you talked about kind of internal, you talked about external, but then you also you knew where, where you had to double down your effort, which was that underwater swim. And I think that's another aspect of your success, because you put yourself out there. You knew what you identified as the friction point, and that's what you had to do to overcome that friction point was right place, right time with the right people. And that's what
yeah.
again that helps you to be successful there. And I think the other thought that I had during this part of the story, right? You can control yourself. You can't control other people. That's something I learned in when I was in fifth group, right? You can control the attitude and the information and the dialogue that you give people. You will not always win every person over that you work with, but you can control your effort, you can control your attitude, and you can control your input. And if you can control those three aspects, right, you take full ownership of yourself and then the input that you could provide.
Dude,
That was
100%, man.
something, yeah, yeah. That's something that it took a while to get to that point, but that's huge because you know what? You're not going to win over everyone. Everyone may not view you number one, right? But if you can control what you give to an organization, you're an expert in your job, in your craft, and then you're always providing and you're showing up. You got to just show up, man. Get your foot in the door, show up with the right mindset, positive mindset, put in the right input, and that's also another recipe for success.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned those three things, right? And I wanted to add up every barrier that you encounter, if you get those three things and you apply them over and over and over and over, eventually you're going to break through that barrier. And once you break through that barrier, I look at barriers as if I was looking at a trading stock, right? You have that resistance that keep pushing you back down, that keep pushing you back down, that you cannot break through it. But once you break through that resistance, your career, you physically, you mentally, you skyrocket and you move on to the next barrier, to the next set of barriers. And that's what I call the growth, man.
Oh
That's what
yeah,
I always look back. And I always, the way I overcome the next barriers, I look back at the past barriers. Okay, if I already been through this stuff, I most definitely can go and break through the next barrier. That's always that I something helps me identify, okay, this is where I'm at now, this is where I was before, and this is where I'm headed. And the reason I mentioned this is where you headed is like this is one of the things that you have to identify before you encounter that barrier. It's like, hey, if you have a clear definition of where you're going, it's a clear definition of your goal, a clear definition of what you want to accomplish. All you have to do is keep applying those three things consistently, and you go
absolutely, man.
back and you're gonna look at yourself as, okay, I'm closer to breaking through. And when you break through, that's it. It's game.
Hell yeah. No, I think that's
So
huge, man.
yeah, I hope you guys got something out of this episode, man. And if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want us to dig a little bit deeper in one of the aspects or the stories, or how did we overcome certain barriers, hey, write it down in the comments or send me or Durso a DM, man. And we'll talk to you guys through it. And again, bro, I appreciate your time to spending out, like, recording this podcast, stepping away from your family. I know you're going through a lot of transitions right now, and I really appreciate your time, man.
No, at any time, man. And like, this is just, it's that important, right? Talking about mental health, talking about, helping each other out, helping the community out. It's so important, man. And, I'll be in anywhere, any state, to have these conversations. So yeah, man, I'm looking forward for the next one, brother. Have a good night.
Brother, you too.